Following show may shock, disturb, and offend some viewers. The opinions, theories, and facts shared on this podcast are not widely accepted by the brainwashed masses, especially those who find dark humor offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant from apes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts and the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
Welcome back, everybody, to the show. Welcome back. I'm your host, Tomcat, aka Tom Thompson, the Raptilian. You can find all my music on all music platforms. We are here with a very important guest, someone I'm really excited about, Leo Zagami. Do you want to introduce yourself to the host heads, we call them, our audience, our fan base? Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Well, you can find an extended bio, of course, on leozagami.com. I've been exposing the New World Order and what we commonly refer to as the Illuminati for 20 years in 2026, starting in 2006. So it's been a long, very long mission to get the people more aware about what's happening behind the scenes due to my own personal experience, which is unique in a way, I would say, because I was born in a family that gave me the possibility to, from a very early age, be in contact with the elites, with secret societies, with the esoteric, with occultism, and what you usually call the aristocrats. The aristocrats are in Europe still a reality, I guess, though most of us have lost our castles and our fortunes. However, like I said, I came out of that New World Order secret society environment in 2006 when I decided I had enough, and I then started to expose the people I was previously associated with a blog, then with a series of books that started to be published in Japan, then in Italy, causing a lot of problems for me. In fact, in the end, I had to flee Italy altogether and move permanently here to the United States of America in 2019, where I'm now a U.S. citizen.
Oh, that's awesome, man. Yeah, I didn't know that you actually moved to America. And for all the fans out there, like, your name has been in the, what they call the zeitgeist, I don't know, for a while. You can phrase it that way, but...
well, it's even in the Epstein files, cited as in these emails that he was exchanging with his close collaborators as a important source for the New World Order and the Illuminati. So
they cited your name? I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yes, that is actually, you can go on the EFTA 01082667, which talks about the Illuminati families and their associates, from Matt of CC, which some say is the creator of The Simpsons. And if you go to the last page, you will find helpful website for learning the nature of the New World Order. And amongst them, there is Leo Lion Zagami.
That's crazy, dude. And the thing is too, for like, I heard your name because of a Vinnie Paz lyric from the group Jedi Mind Tricks. And he was trying to make people aware of this stuff within his music. I do kind of the same thing, as much as I'm not as big as some artists like him. I use hip hop to convey like a message of truth. And the line was, Leo Zagami tried to warn you about the shifting change, but you didn't listen to him. You just want to shift the blame. And I probably heard that when I was like 16 or 17, that line, and your name stuck in my head. So it is pretty incredible. Could you maybe, are you able to divulge stuff about like the family you came from, and have you traced like your bloodline and stuff like that? Like, is there more information?
Of course, after I moved from writing only on websites which usually got even hacked or censored, and a lot of this information goes around on the internet. So when I started actually writing my books, I was finally able to be much more detailed, bring in also the documents, the evidence, the photos with the various participants to maybe the lodge I was involved in Monte Carlo, in the Principality of Monaco, many other groups I was involved with in Norway, in England, in Italy. It was, of course, not easy, because the moment I started to exposing them, and in fact, that's why I ended up in the Epstein list, because at the time we were very few people talking about these subjects. And so the moment I started to expose them, I got accused of espionage in Norway, arrested for espionage. All my stuff was confiscated for a couple of years. I had to go back to Italy and live in very precarious conditions because I didn't have anything anymore. It was, and then in 2010, finally the PST, which is the Norwegian FBI, finally decided to let me go, basically, from. Because I was never to go back to Norway, where, by the way, I had a child that I never saw again. That was also something.
My condolences. That's. I just had a daughter, so like I couldn't imagine being disconnected because of this stuff.
Yes. Yeah, no, that was because the family of my former wife was involved with them, and of course favored them rather than me. Eventually, my son grew up with a new father who is actually from the World Economic Forum and is in charge of the Muslims in Davos. So I guess I will never see him again for sure, even if he's 20 now.
That is crazy.
That is something that I wrote about in volume 10 of my Confessions. Last year, I published the last installment of Illuminati Confessions, which started in the English language. I published my first book 10 years ago. And then, of course, I
definitely get one of your books. I have a big book collection.
I described the whole pyramid of power, starting from volume 1 and then going all the way to volume 12, where you have the eye, which is representing the all-seeing eye in the pyramid, but also the secret connection with the Jesuit order and the Vatican. And then I went on to publish in the last few months, this is my bestseller on Jeffrey Epstein, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, exposing Jeffrey Epstein and the most powerful Jewish sect in the world, as this is the only book that actually talks about his family links, the links also of his collaborators with the infamous Sabatian Frankist heresy within Judaism. So
we just covered that. We actually just covered the Frankist cult, and I was looking deep in the information. That's why I was talking to Chris about it, and he's like, you got to get Leo Zagami on to maybe discuss some of this stuff. And when I was just talking about this with a pretty big influencer, and when me and her were kind of talking about this stuff, we were discussing that. Like, a lot of people don't know where he really comes from and how he got his money. Obviously, he's connected to Mossad and like the Jewish intelligence agencies, and obviously there's very shady things going on in Israel constantly. All roads kind of point back to a lot of the Zionist aspects of this. But like, I would like to definitely hear more, at least of some of the information that maybe you dug up on Epstein, and is like where he comes from and who he's connected to. We know, like, vague things about him, but I don't think a lot of people know as much as they should. Well,
I mean, the last batch of emails, finally we have the confirmation that he was the descendant of the Epsteins, who actually have a palace in the center of Austria, and whose ancestor was also responsible for the Austrian National Bank. And his family was also coming out of Prague, which is a very important center, as well as Vienna for the Sabatian Frankists, but also for a secret society they created called the Asiatic Brethren. I was initiated into Freemasonry in 1993, and that's where I started my path within the various secret societies of the New World Order. It was in that period that a family friend introduced me to the Illuminati of the New World Order. That family friend is no longer alive. He was a member of the Sicilian aristocracy, who was also a friend of my late grandfather, Leopoldo Zagami, who was a Sicilian senator who once belonged to the monarchic party. So Aliata, Prince Aliata, was my initiator in this irregular, because that's what they call it within Freemasonry. You have regular Freemasonry, irregular Freemasonry. At times they tell me that the irregular Freemasonry is actually much more fun than regular Freemasonry. I belong to both of them, and I can definitely confirm that. However, it's also a much more dangerous game when you are in groups who have real power and who don't only deal with the esoteric side, or maybe maybe you have the average Joe who goes to the Rotary or the Lions, but when you get in certain circles filled with members of the intelligence and other groups, you are really playing with fire. So it's a very dangerous game.
It is quite crazy that you grew up in this, and then like, what drove you to leave? Like, was there something you saw, or was there something that you just was aware of that you're like, I can't do this, I can't be part of this?
I will say that the turning point was between 2003 and 2006. That was when I eventually, in the fall of 2006, started with my blog. Then it was quickly picked up by people like David Icke. And then, of course, I became a regular guest on the Greg Zismansky show, which at the time was very popular, the Arctic Beacon. And then from that moment onwards, I stared a lot of attention until I got accused of espionage in Norway, and I was arrested, and eventually I had to flee Norway altogether. It was not an easy thing to do, to come out of this kind of environment and not have any, backlash. I was somebody who traveled a lot between countries, so that gave me the possibility of not being easily detected or pinpointed to a particular location. However, when they did, they came after me very strong. But I didn't give up. Initially, they because the brother of my former wife was a policeman, and he was he wanted to join. I don't know if he then did, probably he did join the intelligence services. He came to me and said, Leo, this was a few months after I started my blog, they are after you, so please stop what you're doing, and everything will be fine. There had been also another prior event to that. Immediately after I started, like 2 months after I started my first blog, the Norwegian secret police, the PST, that's how it's called, came into knocked to my door. They erupted in my apartment with policemen on their side, put my former wife and me in 2 different rooms, interrogated us, and threatened us to take away my child. And of course, that was what eventually will happen. In any case, my former wife demonstrated she wasn't really on my side. She gave in to the offers of the dark side, let's say. But my now current wife, who I met in that period, was also instrumental in bringing me to Japan, where I had a ongoing collaboration with a guy called Benjamin Fulford. Then I published some books there in Japan.
He kind of woke me up when I was like 17. I think it was 17 when YouTube was still when it was better than it is today. And I would watch some of Benjamin Fulford's videos. Like, I was fairly young when I started watching some of this stuff and being aware of it. So that's actually pretty cool. Like, I've known about him for a long time. Probably like 20 years.
He was actually somebody who initially seemed like a good person and a good ally. Then I discovered that when I went to Japan and I actually was inside his home, me and my current wife were shocked because we saw on the wall the actual symbols of Chinese Freemasonry. And then eventually when he came to Rome to visit me, confirmed that he was working for the Chinese.
I heard that he was shady.
Yeah, so he had this shady element, and then he started to accuse me. My life was a very complex life. Like I stated, it came much from my family background. My father was a psychiatrist who also had worked with Meyer, who was the heir to Carl Gustav Jung in Switzerland. Though my father, when he was involved, after he was involved briefly with MK Ultra in France, decided to give up altogether on psychiatry in the middle of the 70s. To pursue his own, he didn't really like what he saw. So these are all things that, of course, I report in my confession series. The experiences make this series unique because it's a bit like a mix between a bio and an essay on the various groups. Aided also by the internal publications that often are not available to everybody. And I cite and I, of course, include when possible, so that people can really get a real glimpse into the realms of secret, the realm of secret societies.
It is fascinating because, like, I didn't know too much about your life story, and it just makes me more intrigued, and I have a million questions going on in my head, right? I was also a big fan of David Icke when I was like a teenager, very young, to be kind of consuming some of this knowledge that I've acquired.
Well, David Icke, I think, was a great guy to actually have on my side in the early stages, because he picked up some of my first articles on my own blog, and drawing a lot of attention. Maybe that attention was for some people too much. That's why they immediately started to threaten me. When you are simply a researcher or a journalist, and I had an experience in journalism when I was working within the music business also, because for many years I was involved as a record producer, and there is a whole discogs on Leo Young records that you can find, which you might find interesting also as you are into music. I was a DJ, somebody who played music in places far remote as Russia. I was the first and only DJ to, I think, ever play at the Bolshoi in Moscow, because I was working with the Russian Ministry of Culture. But behind the scenes, I was, of course, also a Freemason, a member of various secret societies that, like I said, we commonly call the Illuminati, the Ordo Templi Orientis, the Fraternitas Rosicruciana Antigua, the Fraternitas Saturni, all these groups that, of course, to most people don't mean anything, but when you go and study, in the history of esotericism, in the history of occultism, you understand their relevance and importance.
Yeah, it is fascinating because I've been aware of this stuff for so long, and being able to talk with guests like you now that I'm older and didn't even know when I was younger I would start this show. Is there when did you witness anything like that or heard rumors about like some of the dark, disturbing aspects of these occult
rituals? Okay, that was in June 2006. I was attending a meeting, important meeting, in a monastery in Italy, which was actually a meeting of the Monte Carlo Lodge. And our Illuminati group within this lodge was very important and was connected with it was an umbrella organization for a number of secret societies. Plus, it was also a major outlet for all the various so-called irregular forms of Freemasonry, may they be the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite, or the Memphis and Mizraim, and the Egyptian Rite of Cagliostro, and all the others, the rectified Scottish Rite. I was an historian of Freemasonry in my early days, because after I got initiated, I got to London. I regularized my position as a Freemason eventually there with the United Grand Lodge of England, which is, as you know, the mother lodge of so-called regularity. And then I am a relative of the Queen Mother, so I was also a relative of the Queen and of the royal family. That gave me let's say, a privileged position. That's why I was invited by the then Deputy Grand Master, who was the Marquis of Northampton, to belong to the Masonic center he was constituting in this tower that once belonged to Francis Bacon. And so I belonged to this Canterbury Masonic Research Center for many years. And it was a rather elitish group, though it was very much on the actual esoteric and occult history, not anything deviant or... However, in 2006, that was also the moment I definitely started to a war that came out of the inner circles. In 2003, I had been initiated into the 8th degree. Actually, earlier in 2001, I had already acceded to that degree. But when you go through these degrees, you are given certain instructions, certain teachings. And what really shocked me was these teachings that were not really given to the lower degrees that involved human sacrifice. The sacrifice of fetuses that were consumed during black masses and all that kind of really dark and perverted stuff. Anytime there was anything of that kind going on, I had always refused to participate, because I always, I come into this forest in the middle of the night, we will be doing something particular. I said, sorry. I will usually say, sorry, no, thanks. But it was definitely difficult for me to continue to, be in that kind of environment without participating to that kind of thing.
Because
well,
that makes sense, they have to get stuff on you, right? Like that's what the whole blackmail operations, right, is to make sure that you stay within these circles, because if they have something on you, then you can't really leave the circle, because they're like, hey, we have this video of you, we have this, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. But in fact, the fact that you do sexual magic, eyes wide shut kind of things, that is not really still criminal behavior. And so it's not really deemed maybe something that can really bind you to the group, as instead. But when I even refused to participate to the sacrifice of a cat. I thought even that was for me a negative thing. I remember once a guy called Nikolai the Matos Fritzvod, who in the daytime was this seemingly respectable figure. I talk about him in volume 1 of my Confessions, who was a doctor, in charge of a mental health clinic in the daytime, and at nighttime he would be like a voodoo priest who was actually searching for animals to sacrifice and all kinds of weird stuff. But this is really what started to emerge from this world. The fact also that there might be people who were really good people, who might have been Freemasons, who might have been passionate about the esoteric, but will never engage in that kind of thing. But there was a dark side, and I wanted to expose that dark side. And in June 2006, in the monastery where we met, I was debating with a guy called Giorgio Ugo Balestrieri, who at the time was the president or vice president of the International Rotary Club at the United Nations, the possibility of investigating certain groups that I thought were doing, they were doing bad things. And those bad things eventually would be attached to us anyway. So I didn't want to have anything to do with that kind of stuff.
That's fascinating.
So I, between 2003 and 2006, I participated to an internal war within a group called Ordo Templi Orientis. But at the same time, things started to emerge in the Monte Carlo Lodge, because the Monte Carlo Lodge was an umbrella organization where there were many members of all these groups. And so in the end, I remember also when I fought against the Ordo Templi Orientis, they, for example, had written to my own Masonic lodge in London, and then that pushed me in front of a Masonic tribunal because of their own accusations. I was actually trying to expose these people, and I was actually stating, why do you have these people? Even at the Canterbury Masonic Research Center, they had this guy, Eric Bogdan, and I knew that he was connected to the Church of Satan through a guy called Carl Abramson in Sweden, and that they should never be present in a place where you have gentlemen or people who are supposed to be of good moral and ethic and sound judgment, you know? So, I mean, all this pushed me eventually to break up with that word and to expose them, though. And that was, I guess, the first time that a member of certain circles was actually bringing out the goods, let's say, the documents, the evidence.
It's quite, because like I have so many questions going on in my head right now, but it is the same thing you mentioned about these people, you know, acting certain different ways in the day of light, so to speak. And it is like what serial killers do, right? They present themselves, like say John Wayne Gacy and some of the other people, as like these presentable people that, you know, help the community and like stuff with the Shriners and other people like that. And these
well, yeah,
groups.
For example, I give you an experience that I rely also on in one of my confessions. I was at the Masonic Research Center in London, and suddenly there was this American dude called John Compact, who in his life was writing tales for kids, for children. So, I mean, seemingly honest, and he was very much a standing representative of his community, a Republican, living in, I think it was... Fort Collins. It was actually near Fort Collins. It was there, but in Colorado. And I went to, he invited me while I was there at this event, because this event was a very exclusive event. There was the cousin of the Queen, Lord Elgin, who is also the Grand Master, at least at the time. I think probably is dead by now, but he was already old back then. He was Lord Elgin was the Grand Master of the Royal Order of Scotland, which is like the elite of the sovereign commanders of the 33 degrees of all the Supreme Council of the world, aimed to become a member of the Royal Order of Scotland. So, and he's also a relative of mine, because I'm Scottish from the Lyon family. So the Lyon family, the Sinclair, and these families are like very important for the whole, let's say, Templar Masonic history, and for that reason, I was in this situation, and suddenly, though, I see that this John Compact could be an ally, maybe, he seemed a good guy, but then when he invited me and I ended up visiting him. He had the biggest library of the occult in the United States. That's what he claimed. And it was actually incredible. In his basement, text, very rare texts and stuff. But then he said, I'm also a high priest in the Bohemian Grove, in the Bohemian Club. Then he showed me a symbol, and that symbol was connected to a very ancient witchcraft group operating in Great Britain. And then another group connected to another gentleman called Michael Berthier. So I was like, whoa, man, this guy's really dark. So he had really, and I slept and I was actually sleeping in his home when I realized that. So I was, because I asked my friends to leave me there and stay with him for a few days, because I wanted to see this incredible library. But then I get to, know him, and he admits all these things, and it becomes pretty scary.
It is interesting, because like we've covered Bohemian Grove. Obviously, like everyone knows the more, I would say, the surface level stuff. They go to it every July in the Red Forest, and they maybe practice rituals. They get drunk, and there's prostitution, and they worship the owl statue, which people point to Moloch, but other different ideas. Is there anything that you think that people on the surface don't really know about Bohemian Grove? And I'll ask you kind of two questions. this idea of like, is there any information that you know of about Bohemian Grove that most people maybe wouldn't know? Because it's pretty dark if you think about all these rich people and these elitists, you could call them, they're more like parasites, but going to a specific place to participate in some of these weird occult rituals. And then also, I have theories of my own, I've heard other people's theories, but do you know why it always goes back to like sacrificing throughout all of history and all that stuff of what this obsession is, especially with sacrificing children and animals? You know, and we'll get into more stuff after that, but that's kind of like my two main questions: Bohemian Grove, and then like the sacrifice stuff. Like, what's their obsession with it? Why?
Well, so when I was there, of course, you know, I took advantage of the situation when I realized that this guy was also a big shot in the Bohemian Club, and so he was then conducting the rituals in the Bohemian Grove. I was a little bit wary, but I also asked him some questions. So he said, no, we don't invoke any entities there. But of course, we also know, and I, in fact, talk about this in my latest book, that the Bohemian Club was a product, and this confirmed by historians, of something that was born in Europe. The Bohemian Club is because there's a whole area, Bohemia, in Europe, and it's not only because of the Bohemian, and it's also linked to the Asiatic Brethren, which were actually a group founded by a direct relative of Jacob Frank. The mother of Moses Toubruska was the cousin of Jacob Frank, and Moses Toubruska gets enrolled to push all the esoteric elements, the Kabbalistic elements of the Sabatian Frankists within this Masonic group that for the first time lets Jews within their lodges in Germany, in Austria, and the Austro-Hungaric Empire. But in the end, when it comes down to these people, we see that there is a common denominator, like you said. So there must be also something that links them historically, no? So this, for me as an historian of Freemasonry, because at the time I was very much interested in the history, it was very interesting. And so then I went deeper into the research of who were the very influential figures behind all these secret societies and which groups they represented. So the invisible puppeteers of the puppeteers, let's say. And I came down to the conclusion that there is two groups that have all these groups in their hands, and it's basically the Jesuits and the Sabatian Frankists. In fact, my last book, volume 12, is all based on the Jesuits, and you can read it on your own without reading the others. And it's a very, it's a very important book to realize how the Jesuits operate, and behind Freemasonry and behind all this, but with testimonies even from Jesuits themselves, who were both Jesuits and Freemasons. So it's not like the sources that I use for my books, which I also cite in very much in detail at the end of my books, are important, and they are credible and can't be debunked. That is what makes the work I'm doing so special, but also so dangerous. That's why in the end I had to leave Italy when the Masonic, let's say not the regular Masonic environment, but rather the irregular Masonic environment, which I had exposed so well in volume 1 of my confessions, brought me in front of a tribunal in Italy. And I remember the judge itself say, you shouldn't talk about these connections between the Vatican, the Freemasons, and the intelligence services. I mean, what? You reprimanded me in a court of law. I mean, it was just so absurd. And that's why I knew that my time had come in Europe, and I had to really leave as quickly as I could before they will take my passport, which is what they would have done if I stayed only 1 month more. Because in June, I left in like around the 20th of May, 2019, and already on the 6th of June, they wanted to take my passport, crazy. And they started to go after me. And from that moment onwards, they did a series of investigations to make sure I wasn't around Europe. Mm-hmm. They unleashed Europol on me around all the Schengen area. They even went after me here in America, trying to ask information at the Department of Justice. But fortunately, I'm now an American, and I defended by the First Amendment, and I don't have any possibility for them. There is no reciprocity in the law, because in Italy, you can be arrested for what you write. Here you
which
can.
Which is crazy, right? They're trying to do that in Europe.
It's basically the old fascist laws of Benito Mussolini, which they decided to keep after the war so they could punish the very people who they were trying to fight during the war. That is actually, there is a testimony in one of my books in volume 3, I think, I'm not sure if it's in the English edition, I think volume 3, but there is a testimony of these Freemasons, that Italian Freemasons, that during the war stated, we are now in exile, but when we go back, we will use those fascist laws against them. And from that moment onwards, they took over the judiciary, and there is no way you can be a free journalist, an independent journalist. Either you have an owner, somebody from a very powerful media company that protects you and will eventually protect you if you get sued. Otherwise, you simply will, be buried by lawsuits and end up in jail, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's crazy that they're trying to take everyone's freedom. They're doing that stuff in Canada and stuff like that. And what do you think is the purpose? Like, what do you think the purpose of Bohemian Grove is? Is it just for them to blow off steam and to have like a weird, sex magic party, or like, is it just a way for them to blow off steam? Or is there, they do the cremation of care, or, supposedly they're symbolically burning their cares away of all the horrible shit that they probably did the year before. So, like, what do you think the actual main purpose of actually going is?
Well, I mean, the Bohemian Club comes from the golden age of fraternities, which here in America was, like, not only Freemasonry. Freemasonry was so popular, and then you have the Elks, this, that, and all the other. I mean, you have the Goodwill Templars. You have so many orders. Today, it's not that actually Freemasonry. It's having a downfall. It's suffering because basically their secrecy, the fact they maintain all these secrets. It kind of, for a long time, they don't do it anymore. Now they have, they're starting in the last few years since the pandemic, especially, to have a bunch of Masonic podcasts, so you can be informed in total transparency, and visit our lodge, visit our temple. We have nothing to hide, and all this BS. But the problem is that in reality, Freemasonry is a recruiting ground for other secret societies. So there might be nothing bad going on in Freemasonry, but there might be also possibility for people with ill intentions to recruit from a lodge some people and bringing them on the dark side. That is possible. And at the same time, pollute the environment of the lodge, the egregor, the thought form that the lodge is emanating by simply being there. That's why I no longer associate with Freemasonry, even if in Italy, when I went back to Italy in 2008, 2009, I was forced to move back there after the accusation of espionage in Norway. And I decided to reawaken an ancient Christian Masonic rite in order to bring some people on the good side. It didn't really work out so well because, unfortunately, the dark side is way too strong. And like I stated, in the end, I was forced to actually leave Italy, even for the things I was writing, which is incredible because they are trying to transform the rest of the Western world like that, like some kind of North Korean or dictatorial shit where you can't really talk about things.
Communism,
but the purpose is in the thought form. So the Bohemian Club meets a couple of times a year. There's a minor meeting and a major meeting that goes on there. They do the ritual. They have a bunch of groups. Each group is divided in the category, like the guilds. The militaries have their own encampment. The businessmen have their own encampment. Each one has their own encampment. But the actual rituals are a presence that comes from those days in which the ritualistic element was much more popular. Even, like I explained in my latest book, Jeffrey Epstein, the B'nai Brit, who is this paramasonic order founded by German Jews who moved to America because they didn't let them in the lodges in Germany. Still, even after the Asiatic Brethren had opened some of their lodges, there was always a lot of majority of Prussian lodges will not let the Jews in. So they created their own form of Freemasonry, which became super powerful, and it's now the biggest fraternity, Jewish fraternity in the world, B'nai Brit, which is, though, a way for the Sabatian Frankists, this heresy within Judaism, to control. And then in the early 1990s, they created also a group called the Mega Group, the Jewish study group, Les Wexner, and that was the group behind Jeffrey Epstein. But there were also other people like Roy Cohn, who was involved with the B'nai Brit at very high levels, who was a precursor to what Jeffrey Epstein will do later on. Because Roy Cohn died of AIDS suddenly, they needed somebody to immediately substitute him, and they chose Jeffrey Epstein.
It's just so fascinating because it's like all the kind of dot connecting and going back and looking at these things and objectively trying to find, where this kind of ends. And obviously I've been aware of some of the Jewish aspect and control, and we just covered like the Sabbatean cult.
Yeah, but you have to be very careful because with the Jewish element there comes also the tendency to then fall into the trap of anti-Semitism, not understanding what Zionism really is, how it was born, the two different kinds of Zionism, the labor Zionism, then you have the revisionist Zionism. It's almost like they created two different forms of Zionism. One from this guy called Jacobinsky, this guy here, who was the guy who created the Zionist revisionist movement after the labor Zionists instead, which were, of course, socialist and communist in essence. And so they could, create the opposites, dividi et impera, divide and conquer, and that's what they did at the very foundations of Israel, which was created with all these Jews who were forced out of Europe with the pogroms, with the Holocaust, that were themselves created by the Sabatian Frankists. That's why Jeffrey Epstein, when in this last bunch of mails, he talks with Ariane de Rothschild, and he actually confirms the role of his family with the Rothschilds and the Gutmanns in protecting and raising Hitler, almost because he was a destitute before he, of course, became, enrolled in the German army, and then later on became, of course, the Führer. He was a guy who hoped to do something with his life, but he was actually homeless at one point. So, and they admit that they helped him out.
So you're saying that like Jeffrey Epstein's family helped Hitler out at a time like when he was poor, living on the streets?
Yeah, well, that is confirmed in an email he wrote to Ariane de Rothschild, and de Rothschild replies there is actually, almost like in a way being funny, if you can be funny with certain topics, saying he didn't have, after when Hitler became Hitler, he didn't really return the favor to us because of what he did. So there was definitely with Jeffrey Epstein's files, there is a lot to be studied also at an historical point of view when it comes to the background of Jeffrey Epstein. And that's why I'm surprised that only RT, Russia Today, made a tweet regarding Hitler was poor in Vienna. He lived in a shelter funded by Rothschild, Epstein, and Gutmann, which is cited from the email exchange with Ariane de Rothschild. By the way, Ariane de Rothschild now is the CEO of Evelyn de Rothschild, and since 2023, and Ariane de Rothschild made sure that Jeffrey Epstein would be given $25 million to give his expertise. A lot of important people ask Jeffrey Epstein to give his expertise, but the big lie, which even Steve Bannon perpetrated with his interview, which at one point he says, "How can a schmuck like you from Brooklyn becomes, the guy of David Rockefeller and becomes, a member of the board and enters the Trilateral Commission?" And Jeffrey Epstein doesn't really give him an honest answer, because the honest answer would have been, well, my family is the Epstein banking family. My ancestor was the head of we were almost related with the Rothschilds. We were the ones who even helped Adolf Hitler, like he stated himself, to Ariane de Rothschild. And we are, of course, in a bloodline of Sabatian Frankists. That would have been an honest answer, but of course he didn't give that answer to Bannon. And instead, there was this whole thing about, oh, well, I understand about money. Well, of course you understand about money, but how many Jews understand about money? Yeah. And what kind of Jews understand about money in the way you understand it? Because the Sabatian Frankist heresy, for your audience, was an heresy that first expanded in the Islamic world with Shabbatai Zevi. Then with Shabbatai Zevi died. Before he died, he converted to Islam. His followers became the Dommeh. They were all centered with a guy called Baruch Russo, his successor in the island of today is called Thessaloniki. It was called Salonika, part at the time of the Ottoman Empire. Now it's part of Greece, but that was it was a strategic place, Thessaloniki, because it was an island placed just before then you can get into the east of Europe very easily from there. So it was for the merchants a strategic area, and the Sabatians there constituted their important base. I think that the actual guy, and this I explain in volume 10 of my Confessions in great detail, Rudolf von Sembotendorf, the guy who initiated Adolf Hitler in the Thule Gesellschaft, he himself was actually a Turkish citizen also, aside from German, and he had been initiated by a family of Thessaloniki, a family of Dommeh, so by Sabatians. Now, Jacob Frank was also a Sabatian. His family was Sabatian, so and it was a family whose uncle had spread the Sabatian heresy, so they were actually being persecuted and they had to flee and go to Thessaloniki, but he was actually born in today's Ukraine. So once he arrived in Thessaloniki, he realized that he was the reincarnation of Jacob Frank. They recognized him as the reincarnation of Jacob Frank because in those Jewish environments, they actually believe in reincarnation. And then he went back into the Catholic environment instead, rather than the Muslim environment of the Dommeh, and spread the heresy even further, including Catholic elements, and giving to the Catholic Church 20,000 Jews to convert. So that was also an important element. But all the area of Podolia, the Ukraine, Poland, Moldova, and all those areas of Eastern Europe were a hot spot for, hotbed for the Sabatian Frankist heresy that started to spread. The rabbis started to fight it, but they couldn't really fight it effectively. Eventually, they asked the help of the Inquisition even. And when they eventually managed to convince the Inquisition that Jacob Franco was doing some secret work with the Orthodox Russians, then at that point he was arrested and placed where? In this monastery, which is a holy monastery where you have the Holy Mary of Czestochowa, which is a very holy place also for the future John Paul II, who eventually blessed Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell herself is the daughter of Robert Maxwell, who was actually only Maxwell after 1946 because he was a member of the Hoch family, another Sabatian Frankist family born in today's Ukraine, but at the time it was Czech, what became the Czechoslovakian area, but today is still Ukraine. So these people are all connected from ancient times. Is a sect that keeps on taking care of that, because it's not only the Jews. The Jews, in the way they are envisioned by the Sabatian Frankists, are only deemed worthy if they are Sabatian Frankists. Otherwise, they will send them in the gas chambers.
Yeah, well, that's just interesting because we just covered it. It will be out, I think, by the time this gets released. But we did a long form episode discussing the Frankist cult. And, you know, we've obviously, a lot of people have started to seeing what Israel's doing. And I'm not like, I don't think of demonizing people as an entire group. I think watching patterns and stuff like that and seeing how people act and then maybe the things they're involved in is pointing towards something. You have to be aware of these patterns and recognize them and where they're coming from, obviously, right? But I don't believe.
Well, I mean, for example, I was listening to a guy yesterday on an important Italian podcast who was being interviewed. Said, "Oh, Epstein, his father was a modest car park attendant." What?
Yeah, that makes no sense.
Wait, so the father was an Epstein and the mother was a Stofosky. So they were both from a Sabatian Frankist environment, because the sect kept on being united even after they left Eastern Europe or Central Europe, because then they were becoming very powerful also in Vienna, in Austria, and what was the Austrian.
So you think that they, like the Frankist cult, because supposedly he met up with, he created the Bavarian Illuminati. He at least helped with ISIS.
No, it's a little bit more complex. I mean, that's why you need to read this book. In reality, the Bavarian Illuminati precluded the entrance to the Jews. So what happened was the Asiatic Brethren was created, and from the Asiatic Brethren came the link with, basically what happened with that invasion in 1776 was inspired by the guy who then created the Asiatic Brethren. So there is a direct link there, and that's historic, of course. And then these lodges became connected to the Illuminati. The Illuminati, of course, after got persecuted and could no longer use their name after the 1780s, when the persecution started to change their names and transform themselves to survive. But there was actually a very important link, because Frankfurt became it was, of course, the hometown of the Rothschilds, and then it became the hotspot for all the Sabatian Frankists when Jacob Frank moved to Offenbach, which is just in the outskirts of Frankfurt. And in his castle, he created a court where not only the Rothschilds were born, but all the important banking dynasties of the Jewish world.
It's so fascinating because I love these conversations, because this is what I was talking about with my one of my co-hosts from Ireland. We discussed this. I was talking about everyone now is starting to point to it's the Jews, and I don't think in believing in demonizing people and stuff like that as a collective.
That is terrible, because you see, you should never demonize a race. You should demonize the ideology.
Yes.
You can demonize a sect, a religion, even if you want. You can demonize, a political party. You can demonize, you can demonize a race.
No, I agree.
And that's why I'm very glad that my book is actually at the moment being read amongst Orthodox Jews who have, with their own experience, witnessed the threat of the Sabatian Frankists.
And so you're saying that they infiltrated, because that's what we were talking about. I was like, everyone's playing this direction, but this is what it actually is. This goes back to the Zionism, to the Epstein stuff, that it's connected to this Frankist cult, essentially, right?
Well, of course. When you think that Theodor Herzl, who was the founder of the Zionist movement, he wrote a novel which is based also cites not Jacob Frank but Shabbatai Zevi, and it's actually a novel which then gave the name to the city of Tel Aviv. So there is a very much a direct link. What
was the purpose of the redemption through sin? Like, what was because if what I read is that they essentially would do everything against the good nature of human beings, and what they would call God is they would do the opposite. And it reminds me of the idea of the Tower of Babel, is maybe like doing these things to invoke God to try to get him to actually show up. And when we're reading it and discussing this, it's pretty dark, right? They were having sex with their sisters, their moms, doing a very weird, dark occultist magic. So what was the purpose of all that in your view?
Well, if you think about it, the Asiatic Brethren, which then was also connected with Frater Lucis, and then became inspiration within the Illuminati, because you see, you mentioned before the Order of Adam Weishaupt. The Order of Adam Weishaupt was quickly buried under a bunch of accusations, and it was difficult for them to carry on their mission. However, there was actually Moses Dobruska, who became involved with them, and even went to fight within the French Revolution and ended up beheaded with his head off. At the time, this Jacob Frank it was very clever the way he infiltrated the aristocracy, because yes, he brought a lot of converts from the Jewish world, but then he also will take the names of the godfather, because you need a godfather to be baptized, and then at that point they will abandon their Jewish name and take on a name of the godfather. Now the godfather was not the guy with the selling I don't know what at the corner shop. It was some aristocrat. There would be some important member of the community. So then they ended up having the surnames of these important families. They will actually so insinuate themselves even deeper, but and it would be known as the Edomites. Now, at one point though, when Jacob Frank saw all this thing going on, he said, okay, to some of the converts to his heresy, he said, just stay within your Orthodox community and show yourself as the most Orthodox outwards, when instead you can be a crypto-Sabatian Frankist, because some of, the concept of crypto-Judaism was a concept developed initially within the conversos, which became then, this happened in another moment of history, when in the Iberic Peninsula, the Hispanic Inquisition went after the Jews and the Muslims to purge the whole Iberic Peninsula, and so you had that whole transformation of the Iberic Peninsula that forced persecution of the Jews, moved the Jews also. Sometimes a lot of them went, for example, to the Ottoman Empire, where they were still treated in a good way. The interesting thing is that in the end we have these Jews that had to always present themselves maybe as converts to this faith or this other faith, just to survive.
What do you think about the rumors? There's a couple of things I know you have about.
But it's interesting to see the Sabatian literature, the fact that you had this Trinity aspect that was inserted also immediately, even before Jacob Frank came along. There was already some attempts. What does it mean? That by the time, you see, there was Abraham Miguel Cardoso used the term partusuf, which is this term that the Holy Ancient One, the Holy King and the Divine Presence were the Trinity of the Sabbateans opposed to the Christian Trinity. So they will also pick up some elements of Christianity, and they will use them to cover their own heresy within Judaism.
It's fascinating to get into this stuff, because it is like strange, some of the practices they were doing, and it almost seemed in spite of what you would say like the natural order of what we kind of exist in. Like you shouldn't probably have sex with your mom or your sister or stuff like that.
Well, right? But that was done on purpose. Like in my book here, it's very important. I think you should definitely read this book.
I definitely want to grab some.
Because here I explain the holy text of the Sabbatean Frankist that nobody talks about, like the one written by Rabbi Schutz, that still to this day the rabbis in Israel will never admit was written by him, because this became the holy text, the Bala ol Sham, something like that. It's a holy text of the Sabatian Frankists, which it's in reality it's like King David goes on the mountain and he has an homosexual encounter with a guy. It's almost like reading Aleister Crowley. It's not like, it's that kind of thing. An homosexual encounter with God. Through a spy that he brought up there. Some incredible stuff that goes on, almost reminding us very much of the Coronzon ritual that Aleister Crowley conducted with Victor Neuburg in Northern Africa. So it's definitely very
I'd love
interesting.
to definitely get into some of that next time. I want to try to get you on. I know you have maybe about a half an hour left, but I had so many questions in my head. Where these questions about we've talked about the idea of the blood libels and stuff like that. There can't be so much smoke without fire. Do you think it was the Frankist cults, and then they were crypto Jews essentially hiding within Judaism, and then maybe conducting some of these nefarious rituals? Because there's what's his name of Lincoln. There's so many stories and why they got kicked out of all these countries, and weird blood libels and the mitzvah.
Yeah, well, the blood libel thing, Jacob Franco was actually sustaining it. You must understand this, that if you didn't join them, you would become their worst enemy. So even if you were Jewish, but you were not Sabatian Frankist, they deemed you not worthy of living. That's why they were behind Adolf Hitler. When Adolf Hitler was born, Adolf Hitler wasn't a simple, that's why the Rothschild and the Gutmanns and the Epsteins helped him out. He was born out of a Sabatian Frankist ritual. This is the words of Rabbi Entelman.
They did a ritual and Hitler was born?
Yeah, in 1888, there was a ritual conducted by the Sabatian Frankists because on every Jewish holiday, they would do anything possible to be disrespectful to their own religion, eating pork, orgies, all kinds of incestuous behavior. And out of these rituals will come out in 1888, then there will be Adolf Hitler conceived in a Sabatian Frankist environment. And this is not my words, because otherwise people will say, oh, this guy is making things up. No, I cite a rabbi, Rabbi Antelman.
Interesting that they would say that. And it's they're, this guy, I listen to a lot of different stuff and I read a lot, because there's the side of people, right? They obviously think he's the most evil man to ever exist. I think people that were conducting some of the communist stuff were probably a little worse because they killed a lot more people realistically. Or there's this idea that he's controlled opposition, that I've heard from different sources and people I've had on the show that the nationalist movement was inherently good. It was people wanting to defend their nation, but the people controlling it were inherently bad and actually using it against themselves. And then obviously there's people like, say, Ken O'Keefe and stuff that talk about that he was actually the good guy. They essentially destroyed his reputation, cast this image that he was this evil man on earth when he was kicking out the Rothschilds, supposedly, right? And all these things that pointed that he uplifted his people, brought them out of poverty, built up the economy. So I just want to know kind of your thoughts about that, of the people that online now, especially, it's everywhere, of portraying him as some sort of hero, and that he was essentially labeled as the villain. So the people that really in power sacrificed millions of European men, the strongest men to exist, and obviously Japanese, and all the war and death, right, that came of that war that sacrificed generations of strong men. What is your thoughts on this idea that people are trying to portray him, Adolf Hitler, as a hero?
How can it be a hero? A guy conceived by a demonic ritual in the Sabatian Frankist environment. A guy who participated with the Gesellschaft to hideous rituals. Now, we don't want to believe in his so-called diaries because they are, of course, false. That's what they say. They're fake. You remember when the diaries of Adolf Hitler came out, there was a lot of talk about also what was said inside them. But eventually, from what we actually know, and it's proven So we don't need to rely on unproven sources. Already that is enough to make us understand that, first of all, Adolf Hitler was helped very much by a secret society, the Gesellschaft. That's why this history of this secret society is very important, especially if it's linked to the Sabatians in Thessaloniki, to a secret order that helped the rise of a guy like Rudolf von Sembotendorf, who then became the guy who actually founded the first newspaper of the future Nazi party. But then when Rudolf von Sembotendorf, who dies, by the way, immediately after Adolf Hitler in mysterious circumstances in Istanbul, when he writes this book called Before Hitler Comes. That is the book that they really don't want you to read, because it's a way for it was him saying, listen, Hitler is basically my creation, the creation of the people behind me. And who are the people behind him? Were people the Ottoman Empire wanted to revenge very much, still conduct itself against the Jews, who they accused of having sabotaged the Ottoman Empire. In reality, the Ottoman Empire had been sabotaged, yes, by Jews, but by the Dome Jews, which were the followers of Sabbatai Zevi, who stayed and were still very influential. In fact, the founder of modern Turkey, Ataturk, himself is accused of being a Dome, and he was initiated into a lodge in Thessaloniki, Macedonia Risorta, which is connected to all this this whole thing. So I mean,
it's just fast. He's such a like people like he's just such a.
How did Alistair Crowley call his own son Ataturk? Okay,
yeah,
that's it, and that's it.
Yeah, it is interesting. Just because, like, obviously he's such like it's almost like he's like a mythical creature or some shit like that. The way people view Adolf as a person, right? Because there's people like that are sharing supposedly his speeches using AI, and how he was saying he was against the satanic cabal and stuff like that. And then, but where do we get this whole idea of like him?
To say that this is against the satanic cabal.
I'm just telling you what people are thinking out there, right? So I want what's with the whole connection to kicking out the Rothschilds?
Like saying that an OnlyFans model is against porn. I mean, it's just doesn't make any sense. So I mean,
where did you get that idea about him kicking out the Rothschild banking system? Though, why is that rumor spread so often? Because you hear that everywhere.
Kicking out, well, there is actually, I don't have it here, I actually have it over there, a book from the late 1930s published in Italy, in fascist Italy, by the way, which became the main ally of Adolf Hitler. So you can really, from that book, understand many things, you know. The fact is that, of course, there was one moment, a pivotal moment in the history of Adolf Hitler, which was his election, which happened. And at that point, what happened after his election was also very interesting, because you see, this is another topic that is very rarely discussed. But in the 80s, finally, a book called The Transfer Agreement by Edwin Black came out. I don't know if you know this book.
I think so, yeah.
It's a very important topic, and it's a very controversial topic, because you see, I demonstrate in this book, and I talk about also the Transfer Agreement, because the Transfer Agreement is the moment in which the Zionists, which were mainly the labor Zionists at that point surviving in Germany, made a deal with Hitler to bring 10,000 of Jews in Israel. And then, you know, the thing is, with all these Jews who get in the concentration camps, well, it's because they were, you know, Jews wanted to come to America, wanted to continue going to England. They were sent back, just to give you an idea. And then instead, they make a deal with Adolf Hitler, when in reality they could have sabotaged him with the banking system. If the banking system of the Sabatian Frankists, the Warburgs, the Rothschild, the Schiff, all these important families who were connected, were honest, and were really on the side of the Jewish people, they could have closed down the Hitler chapter in one month instead after his elections. Instead, they actually made a deal with him, and that is like making a deal with the devil.
That's what I said. I've said, like, I'm like, well, realistically, without Hitler, there is no Israel. Like, without that, what commenced around Germany and what happened in those years of the war and even beforehand, there would be no Israel. Without, like, the Balfour Declaration, all these things that commenced because of this.
That is also before Adolf Hitler. Balfour Declaration, and is connected to the Rothschild, to basically the Sabatian Frankist. Let's say that at one point, you see, the Jews didn't really want to go back to Israel. That's what the people don't understand. The Jews didn't want to go back to Israel. Israel for them was a nightmare. It was not, it was like a backwards place. They were, a lot of these Jews, especially after the Sabatian Frankists had converted them to secularism. They had modernized them. The ones who were modernized, the ones who deemed even the Yiddish talk or certain Ashkenazis as primitives, like Franz Kafka. Franz Kafka was watching these Orthodox Jews one day and said that they were like some kind of African tribe. So this is what the Jews thought of other Jews. So when Theodor Herzl came along with the Zionist movement, he really had to put together all kinds of different factions that didn't really want to work together. You have the two main tribes, is the Ashkenazi and the Sephardi Jews. But they're very different one from the other, first of all. Then you have the Yemeni Jews, you have the Ethiopian Jews. But these are all very different. So 100%. There was also a problem, and that problem was solved by a guy called Abraham Isaac Koch. Abraham Isaac Koch, who was also known with the Jewish acronym Arayaya, was an Orthodox rabbi. And he was the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of British Mandatory Palestine. He was the one who convinced the Orthodox and the people into the more spiritual side to support Judaism. Because there was not that much support. And so when so let's go back to that 1933. Edwin Black, I think, explains it greatly and with great clarity, but I, of course, cited him on my book because it's important to be clear about this. Edwin Black, when he wrote this book, he was the first one to actually have the courage to bring something that was deemed inconvenient until the 1980s. Nobody wanted to know that the Jews had made a deal with Adolf Hitler. Anyway, on February 22, 1933, B'nai B'rith president Alfred Cohen convened a conference of 15 Jewish leaders. And they met in New York. They reviewed the situation, what was going on with Adolf Hitler. Now, B'nai B'rith had all the power and the influence to stop Adolf Hitler. Let me be clear about that. Now, Adolf Hitler was in their eyes nothing more at the time than an interim chancellor appointed until the next general election that was scheduled for March 5th. By March 5th, Hitler, for them, might be gone. But there was already an increased perception amongst the people who knew the situation on the ground, who knew what Hitler was about, that he was having an increased support, and that increased support was also connected to this vicious anti-Semite element. Now, when we go and study that vicious anti-Semite element, it's actually an anti-Semite element of Sabatian Frankist origins. Is that same kind of anti-Semitism that the same Jews themselves, like Franz Kafka, had against other Jews. They deemed primitive because they were wearing the strange thing, and doing the things that usually Orthodox Jews do. Now, it's important to understand that today, in 2026, Sabatian Frankists might not be alive and kicking in every, academic circle and stuff, because they have been hiding. They have been hiding covertly, but they are present. And they're present not only in those Jews who are progressive, which are the majority of today's Jews. Even the rabbinical teachings and centers are mostly progressive. Today, here in America, 80% probably of the rabbis will accept even having a transsexual rabbi or having a woman rabbi. So things that are really against the classic Mosaic laws, okay? But going back to all this, when it comes down, for example, today you have the most known movement in the Hasidic environment, which is the Chabad. Chabad is,
because
Chabad,
with the tunnels and stuff, like them crawling out of tunnels, and like the Talmud and the 8 genders and like all that stuff, is that coming from the Frankist cult? Because I've read some of that, and it's pretty dark.
Absolutely, but that is really, because when we go into the Hasidic movement, and we see that this important rabbi, and this was information that I got directly from the Jews themselves, from the Orthodox Jews. So I mean, a lot of my work is done, of course, on ancient texts, but other work is done interviewing, speaking with people, having Jewish friends who I can, connect regularly, and they will explain me things that maybe I misinterpret, or maybe. So this is very important. The Jewish people claim that when Moses came out of Egypt, that was the moment in which things started to go towards the dark side with the people who worship the golden calf. And those people were the Erev Rav. Now, the Erev Rav were present until then. They manifested with the Sabatian, and then the Sabatian Frankist even more. And then you have, of course, religious Zionism, which is in itself contradicts real religious behavior. Because religious Zionism is now called a component of Orthodox Judaism. But in reality, it was kind of crafted before the establishment of the State of Israel, so they could help building the Jewish state in the land of Israel, alongside with the more progressive, the labor Zionists, the people who didn't give a damn about religion, which is a lot of Jewish people. I mean, you can see it yourself. I mean, did Jeffrey Epstein hang out with a bunch of Orthodox rabbis and stuff? No, the majority of time he will hang up with the Woody Allen or the Noam Chomsky, and you can't really say those people are religious. They are as secularized as you can get. But the secularized element knows very well how they got secularized, and at the same time, they still preserve some kind of religious, element. So
it's like on the surface, they're like conducting business, acting one way, and then behind closed doors, it's like that whole idea of like them infiltrating and then still practicing the original like Frankist cult movement. Like that's why it's interesting. I know we're limited on time, so do you think I got like 2 questions maybe to end it on? Do you think that like the Nazis and stuff like that, do you think they were practicing like these occult? We talked about the Vril and stuff like that. Do you believe that there's a possibility they did start contacting some entities and channeling something from beyond the physical reality, whether it be the Vril, and you have like Maria Orshridge, or the chick that supposedly is channeling all these entities? Like, do you think there's truth to that they, and obviously there's maybe a connection to the OTO? Do you think they were actually like maybe channeling?
Okay, first of all, Aleister Crowley became the leader of the OTO after a regular election that took place in Germany in the middle of the 1920s. So that should give it out. I mean, it's the election for the head of the OTO, which itself descended, and there is evidence that I provide in this book, documents from the early stages of the OTO before even Aleister Crowley was enrolled in it, by Theodore Royce at the very foundations of it, that evidences that they based their whole teachings on the teachings of the Asiatic Brethren. Is actually stated on their official documents. So they were basing their teachings on the teaching of the Sabatian Frankists, which were the first ones to bring, let's say, this sexual magic to the ultimate level. Here in America, the first group that proposes sexual magic is by a friend of Abraham Lincoln, Pascal Beverly Randolph, who himself was connected to these people, as well as Madame Blavatsky, whose mentor was Max Theon.
So that explains Abraham Lincoln maybe being gay, because he's supposedly was doing some weird stuff.
He was doing some weird stuff, but especially Pascal Beverly Randolph was one of the biggest proponents of smoking marijuana, but also eating hashish and doing all kinds of things. He was actually, I think, selling it by correspondence and stuff. But Pascal Beverly Randolph is also one of the inspirers of this sexual magical teachings, but nothing could have been possible without the Sabatian Frankist and what came out of the Asiatic Brethren. So that's why in my book I give that whole description in regards to Adolf Hitler and what happened with Adolf.
Stuff.
Well, Adolf Hitler, and you said, if the SS, of course, we know, with Himmler was practicing the occult. They even had the whole Bessenburg castle there and the whole setup. They were definitely obsessed by tantric practices, all kinds of occult practices. That was, it was really what the Nazis were all about. They were feeding off that stuff. The energy that is mythologic at that time, and of course it was very much promoted initially within the Golden Dawn, but the Golden Dawn had a direct contact with the Thule Gesellschaft, the Golden Dawn, and there were then people of great interest that are linked to this whole world that kind of many people don't know anything about. Now, one of them was Trebish Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
You ever heard of this guy?
No.
Well, maybe you can do a whole show on this guy only, because this guy was a Jew, Sabatian Frankist, then became an Anglican priest and ended up his life as a Buddhist monk, and eventually he would be killed by the Nazis because he was about to reveal his involvement with Adolf Hitler, which was a real involvement, testimony, and all those people. So, I mean, this guy is an interesting guy. And then you have this other important guy who is Max Theon. You ever heard of Max Theon?
Sounds familiar.
He's the mentor of Madame Blavatsky. And he was a Polish also Sabatian Frankist. So I mean,
it's connected. Yeah, it is quite crazy, because like we want to cover like the Black Sun, the Vril again. A lot of people find that stuff interesting. And
but the thing is, regarding, for example, a Vril secret society, we never really have the evidence, the tangible elements that can bring us, the definitive confirmation. While instead, with the Thule Gesellschaft, we have that confirmation.
That's why I find it so interesting, because there is this push for like, oh, he was a hero type shit. And I want since I've read about this stuff, right? I've always looked into. I have books on the Nazis and the occult. We covered it like when we first started the show, like 6 years ago, and we were like talking about this stuff, and we did a whole we were like having fun, having some drinks, and just talking about like the occult and Nazism. And that's what I always
were practicing the dark arts. They were they even, when they liberated Berlin, they even found one of the officers of Adolf Hitler with a whole temple dedicated to Thelema, which was the religion of Aleister Crowley. We know that one of, when they brought, after, of course, Project Paperclip, they brought all the Nazis over and all that. They brought along also certain beliefs that apparently were linked to a rabbi, Sabatian Frankist rabbi. There is maybe the only one who cites this satanic rabbinic connection within the Nazis here in America is Peter Levenda, but it's very brief. He does it very briefly in one of his publications.
One last thing to end this on. So I've been fascinated with the whole like reptilian conspiracy theory for most of my life. I had a weird shadow people experience where I felt like I saw these very demonic looking things. It felt like my soul was getting ripped out of my body. I was like 19. I've seen that there's stuff outside of our reality. It was like I was sober and had a crazy experience. But
yeah, but we have to be very clear here. I mean, I remember 20 years ago when I tried to explain this also to David Icke. I remember I published an article not so long ago explaining that in the Muslim tradition you had the jinn, you had the ifrit, you had these creatures that were definitely also times very demonic, but the problem, but they had a reptilian resemblance. We could, I could write a whole book about the reptilian and demonic, but the reptilian actually being itself part of the human race. Well, we have maybe a reminiscence of it, in here in the back of our brain. But in reality, we don't have, me. If it was for what is, the David Icke hypothesis was too materialistic. Wasn't interdimensional. It wasn't about the demonic. It was about literally people that were reptilians and shapeshift. Well, that is a bit far-fetched. I mean, if you intend for shapeshift, the shapeshift a demonic guy has when you are about to exorcise him, you can literally witness.
That's what you're saying. You see the eyes. I'm compiling a bunch of videos of like just for an episode we're going to do about this.
That is another thing, though. It's not like
That's what I'm curious what you think.
It's not like I'm born in this family and I have a different kind of, I don't have a tail between my legs. I don't have under me some kind of shape-shifting that I turn into. I mean, I remember the situation got so ridiculous that one guy once, rest his poor soul, he is now dead. He interviewed me on Skype. Skype started to malfunction because of the connection. And suddenly, a few days later, I had a video on the internet. Leo Zagami shapeshift. He's a reptilian.
Oh, of course, right? They do stuff like that all the time, and it gets kind of ridiculous. But I almost mean, in what he started to point towards, I think, when he started doing a little more research, is the idea that's like a hijacking, like they hijack these bloodlines metaphysically, like outside of our reality. Is there like, because I've seen weird stuff. I used to.
Well, I did a whole book. I did a whole book on the subject, which is a book which also maybe I suggest you go and read, which is Invisible Master. I think that able you will have in the Invisible Master the answers you're searching for. Okay, it was a very successful book. I published it, I think 7 years, in 2018, actually, in November 2018. And it's called The Invisible Master, The Puppeteer's Hidden Power. In this book, I explain why the misunderstandings with the reptilian theory, but also I explain that since ancient times, people within certain secret societies, but also within the shamanistic world, have been involved in evoking these entities.
So you do believe that there is like dark entities, like, and they might not even be necessarily like reptilian, but there is some sort of dark force or forces of different type of interdimensional beings that are kind of corresponding with our world?
Absolutely, because I also had direct experiences that, I could touch and I could, with my senses, experience that. And it was especially during the period in which I was involved with the magic of Abramelin the Mage, which is a ritual which lasts 6 months, which very few people have the courage to
Didn't Crowley do it?
Undertake. Yes.
Yeah, he did.
And then I did it, though nobody had ever the courage to do it in Rome, and to actually do it in Campo dei Fiori, where Giordano Bruno had been burned on the stake. And so when I started this ritual, all kinds of strange things happened in my life, but I'm glad that I was able to complete it, and I was even more glad when I was able to exorcise the demons that was latched onto me, because in reality you are supposed to dominate the demonic, but it's very difficult and it can always get out of control. And when it gets out of control, I had some very bad experiences.
Like the Bullskin house and stuff, and like that, the Boleskine house, how he, like, whatever, like he didn't close the portal, supposedly.
Yes, now in April, they are inaugurating. It was 2 times went on fire in 2015, 2019. Now a mysterious foundation suddenly refurbished it and is looking like looking like a $10 million mansion.
Oh, weird. They rebuilt it?
Yes, and it's inaugurating this April. So good luck with that.
That's crazy. So, like, I'll let you shout out your stuff, and I would definitely like to get you back on at some point. I just like, there's literally a million questions. Like, I thought this was very eye-opening, very interesting, and I feel like we just kind of brushed the surface. Like, of course, I want you to promote your books.
For the people who are viewing us to check out, of course, the latest book.
I'm gonna get that. I'm gonna get that one specifically. But
if there's volume 12.
Yeah,
Volume 12, very important, because this is the history, secret societies and the politics of the Jesuit New World Order and the Luciferian court is a very.
I definitely want to. I want to add your books to my collections.
Then, of course, if you want to go to the basics, you go to Volume 1, but the basics include also elements like the typology, the theories around how secret societies operate. So societies in secret form, society with secret objectives, which are these objectives, societies of a political, of a religious, of other nature. They're all described with documents that are from within these fraternities, so they can really.
I want to collect some of your books. I definitely think the fans should go check them out. I know there's gonna be fans that will probably go instantly order them. But like the Epstein one, is there two? Like, because I want to at least start with 2 of your books. What would be
I would
two ones that you
I would definitely suggest, if you want to start with 2 books, start with the last chapter of the Confessions.
Okay.
And with my book, The Rise and Fall of a Frankist Monster, which, by the way, is not simply a coincidence. Frankenstein was a tale by Mary Shelley based on Jacob Frank.
Whoa, that's crazy. That's wild. That's very interesting, man. I thank you for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Everyone go check out Leo Zagami's stuff. You tell them where they can find you, like your website, just to make sure they really know how to support you, because this stuff's fascinating. And I would definitely, in a month or 2 or a couple months, I'll see what you're up to and see if we can do another interview, because there's so many things I could ask you.
Well, that would be my pleasure. I will be working from now to the next few months on a new book project. And then, yes, the people can always find my latest articles on leozagami.com together with the links to all my books. That can be found also on Amazon. And thank you for having me on.
That's sick. I'm excited. That's going to be awesome. I'm definitely going to order one of your books.
But definitely will be even more interesting interview if you can interview from the actual content of the book.
Yeah, 100%. I'm definitely going to order one. At least I start with the Epstein in the last volume. I think that would be awesome. I appreciate you coming on. Thank you. For all the fans, obviously. If you want to, you can sign out, and then I'll just kind of end the episode. And
sure.
I appreciate
the best, guys.
On. Thank you.
God bless you all. Also up there in Canada.
Yeah,
Canada. Bye-bye.
Yeah. I'll keep in contact, and we'll put something together in a couple months.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah, interesting stuff. Wild. Like, it's so crazy. I find that that was a great interview. That guy was fascinating. Like I said, I heard about him from a hip hop lyric when I was like a teenager. It's mind-blowing stuff. And for everybody, like, I hope you caught, especially on audio. Yeah, he has a pretty thick accent. I caught like literally 99.9%, but there was a couple things I was like, oh, now I realized what he was saying. And it's just because he's got a very thick accent. But like, mind-blowing information. It is interesting after we covered the Frankist cult and how this all seems to lead up to the same type of thing. And that's why I really try not to, I make jokes with the Jews and stuff. I'm not meaning to demonize people or any of that. It's a comedy show. I'm kidding around. Like, it's satire a lot of times. That's what the show is. It's a satire comedy show. Don't take anything seriously, but that stuff is just fascinating. Like, to be able to have guests like that when I was just wanting to start this show with me and my friends, having some drinks in a basement is fascinating, and just kind of led this direction. Fascinating stuff. Like, he's obviously done a lot of research and looked at, and I would definitely suggest, checking out one of his books. Like, I'm going to start getting back into the books that I've been reading, and I've read the, Redemption Through Sin, 1666. So there is some truth. That's why I ask these questions that are like maybe more controversial about like who really was like Adolf, and there's a lot of people that want to hero worship these people in the past, and how much do we really know about them? If he can prove the connections between, the Rothschilds and some of these people that were maybe funding him, it's interesting. All this stuff is mind blowing. It's interesting. I'm just here to learn and just kind of figure out what the truth actually is. I don't know if we'll ever find out what it actually is, but I think that knowledge is an infinite pursuit. You should be constantly pursuing knowledge. The people that believe that they know everything, you got to watch out for those people, because everyone's so sure in their beliefs, whether they be religious or in this conspiracy world. Now everything is super schizo, and they think everything is fake, which who knows, could be true. But you never should be dead set on your beliefs, and you should always be trying to gain more knowledge and more experience, different ways of thinking, and that's what I do by doing the show. I'm collecting all this information. I'm learning from all these different people, and I'm formulating my own opinions and my own thoughts about things. But if you guys could support the show, please go to Patreon, support it. I'll be doing actually some more solo stuff, some stuff with Troy. There's going to be some interesting stuff that we're going to be working on, probably stuff with the boys, with Billy and Aaron. But I'm going to be doing some watch-alongs. I'm going to be doing research while on some Friday nights. It's going to be live streaming probably on Rumble and YouTube sometimes. Some of the more controversial stuff will only be Rumble. And then that will be taken and put right on Patreon after I'm done the live stream. So I'll be doing stuff like that once in a while, once a month on a Friday. I'm really going to try to build up the Patreon content. And there's tons of stuff already on there. We have episodes you've never seen. We have tons of videos you've never seen. We have Lost Tapes episodes. We have a lot of the Strange Ones videos will be transferred over there from the old show. So, I appreciate everybody watching. Support the show. You can buy merch. I'm wearing one of our shirts right now. I love this shirt, the Strange Brew Podcast, where he's the little skeleton man smoking a cigarette. We have lots of merch on the website. We don't get a lot of money from it, but it's you repping it is more important to us. So, all your support is it's much appreciated, and we need more of it so we can do more stuff and grow the show even more. So thank you for all the host heads out there, everybody watching, all the new fans. Stay strange, everybody.